Welcome to the May edition of the Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies webinar held in collaboration with the Society for Digital Mental Health. During the talk, please go ahead and put questions into the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and read them off at the end. And today, I am really pleased to introduce to you Adrian Aguilera. So Adrian is, I've known him for many years. He's an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of California in Berkeley, and a faculty member at the University of California, San Francisco in the Department of Psychiatry. He directs the Digital Health Equity and Access Lab, where he focuses on using mobile technology to improve access and reduce health and mental health disparities among low-income and vulnerable populations. And his work focuses especially on Latinx communities. Adrian, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Thanks so much to all of you for joining. We'll go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the things I think we should think about in terms of integrating equity into digital mental health interventions, and then talk to you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in our lab. So first, I think it's helpful to get an overview in terms of where digital health is in terms of what it's targeting. And I think one of the reasons there's a lot of potential is that there are a lot of apps, digital health interventions targeting mental health. There are also a lot targeting diabetes, which are two areas that I'll talk about today. And one of the reasons that these are two important targets are because they're typically things that need to be managed consistently over time. And as we know, digital health provides opportunities to do that. Another kind of framework that'll be helpful to think about as I present today is this taxonomy of interventions developed by Ricardo Munoz, which kind of breaks down the way we can think about the relative impact of face-to-face intervention compared with technology adjuncts. And then we look at type 3, which is more self-help, but has some guidance to it. And then type 4 is totally automated. So it's important to think about this progression of interventions and different ways to apply technology. There's a little nod to David Moore and colleagues. And I really think the supportive accountability framework has been really central to the way I think about digital health. And I think increasingly we're, I think, coming back to this and really recognizing the role of human support, of guides, and thinking about different creative ways to provide support to people doing digital interventions. Another aspect, another framework that influences the work that I've done is the efficiency model developed by kind of expanding on the supportive accountability model by Steven Schuler, thinking about usability, user-centered design, and then the various aspects that a supporter can help with, right? So motivation is highlighted in the supportive accountability model, but also thinking about kind of fit, some knowledge aspects, all in service of improving clinical outcomes. So one of the questions that I often ask myself when I'm looking at digital health interventions is, who are you designing for? And these are some examples of ads for Apple Watch and the Google Fit products. And what we can see is that a lot of the target for some of these products, these digital health tools, they're not just digital health devices, I would say, but that is one big aspect of them. They target people who are already relatively healthy. And I think one of the challenges with doing that is that if we are targeting people who are already healthy and helping them optimize their health, we're going to have a relatively small impact on the broader public health, public mental health. Also, if we look at language, so what are the targets of language for digital health programs? And by far, English is the biggest language represented in digital health interventions. And that really misses opportunities for developing in other languages and reaching other populations. So an English speaker can go out and look for a product and have a lot of options at their disposal, whereas other speakers of other language, I work a lot with Spanish speakers, can go out and they're not going to have as many options. So if you're developing interventions, thinking about developing in other languages can actually help reach more people, and in some ways you even have less competition. Another challenge, and I think a limitation of digital health, particularly in the private sector thus far, and a reason that I think we haven't had quite as much traction as we could, is that companies have primarily focused on healthy volunteers, not targeted high burden populations, not addressing outcomes such as cost and access to care. These are the types of things that are really going to bend the cost curve. And they're not central to the development of various digital health products. So I think until we make that more of a central focus, we're going to have a harder time seeing real impact. With that, we're not targeting, for example, the Medicaid population as much, which is experiencing a higher burden of mental illness compared to other populations. Broadly speaking, just some highlights in terms of some disparities in mental health and digital disparities. We know that racial and ethnic minorities are less likely to receive mental health services, and when they do, they're more likely to receive lower quality care. Unfortunately, this seems to be translating into the digital space as well. We also know that folks from diverse backgrounds, socioeconomically, and from lower levels of education, in addition to racial and ethnic minorities, often have lower levels of digital literacy and have a difficulty using commercially available apps. The primary fear is that if marginalized and underserved populations aren't considered during the development of these tools, we might actually entrench rather than overcome existing disparities. This is a real concern. When we look at technology adoption across the three major racial ethnic groups in the US, we see that if we move down to smartphones, that there's roughly equal, similar ownership of smartphones. So there's access there. However, we do need to consider differences in access to home broadband, to desktops, or laptops in how we develop our interventions. So data-intensive interventions may not be as appropriate for all users. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine held a digital health equity workshop some years back, but I think the points still hold that technology is really about people, and addressing these disparities goes back to placing people first, not technology first. And I really do think that at the advent of digital mobile health, kind of in the early 2000 teens, there was a real kind of fetishization of technology and a real focus on what the technology can do. And we did place technology first, and still do in some instances. But we really need to think about how it interfaces with people more so. And with that, community engagement is essential in improving these interventions and ultimately in improving health. here's a graphic that helps us think about how engaging with communities can lead to impact. So on the left-hand side, we can see kind of the relative power that we provide communities, and on the bottom, the relative impact. And, we can work with communities and help them inform interventions, but really do most of the work ourselves. We can take it a step further and involve communities in the development. Or we can also have communities drive projects and ideas and targets. So it's important to think about this and think about how we can really merge our expertise with the expertise that communities have, particularly in terms of defining problems. There are a couple of frameworks that are starting to be developed that are thinking broadly about digital, not just at the individual level. So this is an adaptation of the National Institute of Minority and Health Disparities. I believe that's the acronym. So they've had this framework thinking about the various levels of domains of influence on health, from the individual to societal, from the biological to the healthcare system. And there's recently been an integration of the digital environment. And I think it's important to think about not only the individual level, which is really important to think about in terms of digital literacy, access, things like that, but even thinking about how these things move up, thinking about infrastructure. So as I mentioned previously, the availability of broadband, for example, and even policy. We saw a big change in policy at the beginning of COVID when HIPAA restrictions were lifted in terms of telehealth. And now we're seeing the impact of policy now that a lot of the kind of COVID emergency policies are ending. So these are all impacting the work that we do. Here's another framework that that's helpful in thinking about how we can design digital health more equitably with an eye towards social justice is the Digital Health Social Justice Framework developed by Caroline Figueroa, along with a few of us as well. She was a postdoc at Berkeley. Is thinking about some of these factors in development. So first of all, equitable distribution, right? Who am I, who's part of my research, who is part of the development? Thinking about equitable design, privacy and data return, stereotypes and bias. Am I reifying stereotypes and bias within the products that I'm developing? And then also considering structural racism. And this is, I know it's challenging because we're working at the individual level and it's hard to, totally change, let's say, structural racism. However, it is important to start to acknowledge things like structural racism that people face on a daily basis and impact their mental health. All right, so that's the broad framework that I work under, kind of some of the things that I think about as I enter this work. And now I'm going to go in and give you a few examples of some of our work over the years. The first project that I'm going to talk to you about started with trying to address some challenges with implementing cognitive behavioral therapy for depression in public sector settings. We know that attendance predicts improvement in CBT for depression. However, in our setting, 23% of people dropped out after one session. Homework completion was quite low, with only 23% of people completing homework, and half of the people that participate finish less than half of the treatment. So not high adherence, generally speaking, or engagement. Here's another way to look at the data, where we see that most people only attend a couple of sessions and attendance drops off. the model that we've used at the General Hospital in San Francisco is a 16-week treatment. So you would think, or you would hope, that the bar would be highest at 16 weeks, but in practice, we see that it's kind of all over the place. So this is data before we integrated any technology. So we wanted to leverage text messaging to improve treatment quality and engagement in the CBT intervention for depression. Why did we use text messages? So what's not on here, part of this had to do with when we started. So I started developing this work in 2009, 2010, when texts were one of the things that was more available, and in particular, for folks from low-income backgrounds. So smartphones were taking off, but the smartphone penetration rate was not as high, broadly speaking. Now that's a little bit less of an issue. Even still, texts are still widely accessible. They're cost efficient, and there's high engagement rates. And I think another thing that we've learned throughout the course of our research is that there's a greater sense of personal connection via the messaging app, right? It's something that people already use, and that's how they use it. So the text messaging as an adjunct to CBT is integrated into group cognitive behavioral therapy for depression at the General Hospital in San Francisco. For the trial, we focused on Spanish speakers, and we used the Bright manual for depression, which was developed by Ricardo Munoz and Jeannie Miranda at the General Hospital as well. There are 4 modules over 16 weeks. And what we did is we compared a control group, which was receiving the standard group CBT, with one receiving that intervention, but instead of being assigned homework, they would get automated text messages. Here are some of the patient characteristics, comparing the control and texting group. Some of the key things to highlight are on the right. In particular, most people in the study had less than a high school education, but almost everybody owned a smartphone. And but even if most people owned a smartphone, not everybody used text messaging. So we actually had to teach some folks how to do that during the study. This is one of the core elements of the homework for the intervention, where people track their mood throughout the week and then answer a question about some other element of the intervention, whether it's tracking thoughts, tracking activities, social interactions, etc. And so what we did is we tried to kind of convert that into a texting format, and also sent out medication reminders as well as attendance reminders. So we sent a mood monitoring text randomly from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., asking people to rate their mood and respond with a message about what they're doing or thinking. They would get responses back about 25% of the time randomly to keep some engagement going, but also to not overburden participants. They would receive theme-based text messages where we reinforced elements such as mood monitoring, cognitive restructuring, behavioral activation, and improving relationships. This is a basic medication reminder that's pretty broad and was optional. And then a group reminder text the day before session. When we receive the mood data, it's displayed on the Healthy SMS site, and we can look at the pink line for an example of how we'd use it. So we might contrast, let's say on Tuesday, this person wrote 6, estoy en casa, I'm at home, compared to 8, estoy con una amiga, I'm with a friend. So we can pull out a variety of factors. If we're focusing on thoughts, we can explore the thoughts around these two different times. We can focus on the behavior of being at home versus being out, maybe with a friend. Or we could focus on the interpersonal nature of being alone versus being with somebody. So really using the data, the real world data to bring the CBT concepts to life. So our key outcome was looking at attendance and engagement with the intervention. And what we found is that texters attended over twice as many sessions, 6 compared to 2.5. And more dramatically, they they stayed in treatment longer. So time to dropout was, the text kind of overlaps there, but 13.5 weeks compared to 3 weeks. So quite a big difference. And I think this is where the key to something like text messaging shows its influence in that people are getting messages whether or not they're showing up. So maybe they lose a little bit of motivation and stop attending, but they are more likely to come back after an absence of even a couple of weeks. Whereas people who don't get a message, once they drop out, they're really much less likely to come back because they don't have that constant nudge of or reminder that this resource is out there. So a texting adjunct can decrease treatment attrition, which can lead to more people getting better ideally. We also wanted to use this data to try to predict outcomes and improve the intervention further. And so what we looked at was how can we predict whether or not someone is going to show up to session? And we found that mood the day before session predicts whether or not somebody's going to attend, such that a 1-point increase from someone's baseline increases the chances of them attending by 32%, or vice versa. Lower mood is less likely to attend as well. And this is important because we can identify critical points for intervention, informing tailoring. We can outreach either via an automated format or via clinician outreach. We also found that mood ratings in the past week map on to PHQ-9, which is relatively straightforward, but it's also important because this may allow for remote monitoring of larger numbers of people. In the age of screening, particularly in primary care, this can be a low burden, simple way of monitoring folks. And we find it's a big improvement on asking PHQ-9 questions, particularly for folks with lower levels of health literacy or literacy period. We often would have to sit with people and ask the PHQ-9 questions, and it could take as much as 15 minutes to go through the questionnaire, whereas simple mood rating is pretty straightforward. Some of the feedback that we got more from the development stage of the intervention. This is feedback from English speakers. And as you can see, a lot of it's related to being self-reflective, being aware. These are all things that we really try to reinforce with clients who are working on improving their mood, is to first be aware of how you're feeling. So we were really excited to see this. And then we asked Spanish speakers same question. As you notice, the theme is a little bit different. So a lot of people also mentioned self-awareness, but they tended to mention more often that they felt cared for and supported. They said it in many ways. They make me feel that there are people that care about my health. So even though these are automated messages, there's this sense of connection. And we know that culturally, this makes sense given that Spanish speakers from Latin America tend to have more of a relational framework where they see themselves in relation to other people in the world. And that includes their health and mental health. So it's important to recognize that what we develop interacts with what people bring to the table as well. In this case, culturally. In terms of suicidality, we instruct patients this is not direct communication, but patients still feel a connection. There are keywords in the system that can trigger messages to the clinician so that we can go in and see if there's anything concerning in the message. So from this line of work, using the mood text program, generally speaking, we have found that patients who text attend more and stay longer. Higher day mood rating predicts attendance. Mood ratings via text can approximate PHQ-9. Patients like interacting with automated text generally. And broadly, digital literacy issues are real, but they're addressable. All right. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and tell you about kind of the follow-on project from mood text, which was done in collaboration with my colleague Courtney Lyles, who has expertise in diabetes. And I think from our side, we recognize that within primary care, a lot of people with depression had chronic illnesses, diabetes being one of the most prominent, particularly amongst Spanish speakers and folks from Latin America. Diabetes is a pandemic, before the COVID or epidemic, I should say. However, interventions are siloed. So we wanted to think about bringing the interventions for both together, and we honed in on physical activity as a core mechanism. And addressing a few things within the development of the intervention that I think many of you will agree on is that mobile health interventions need to be personalized. They need to be integrated into care, and they need to be developed with low-income and vulnerable populations in order to have that broad impact that I was talking about earlier. So we know that both diabetes and depression improve with increased physical activity. We think about it in terms of behavioral activation with depression, but it's not purely behavioral activation in the sense of pleasant activities, but it's a good proxy for it. So the innovation that we applied was reinforcement learning. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea is that we aim to increase physical activity by first passively sensing steps, and then using a reinforcement learning algorithm to personalize messages that can target specific motivators that are most impactful. This is the DIAMANTE app. It's a pretty straightforward app tracking steps. And then here are the messages that we sent out. First, a feedback message about how many steps somebody walked relative to their goal, and then a motivating message afterwards. We use the COM-B framework to develop our messages. And the idea behind this model is that a behavior is influenced by capability, opportunity, and motivation. And so we develop buckets of messages within the capability, motivation, and opportunity boxes for motivating behavior. We applied reinforcement learning, which is a type of machine learning that focuses on taking actions to maximize a reward. In our case, the reward is step counts, and I'll go into it a bit in more detail. So here are some of the factors for those of you less familiar with reinforcement learning. I'll go through it quickly. So first, we think about action variables. So what is the algorithm going to do? Contextual variables, which are variables related to a participant. So their characteristics, data related to them. Reward is the outcome. So in this case, it's steps. And then the model is how we predict that reward. So the action variables are those feedback messages that I mentioned. So they could get one of 4 messages. So either no message or a different way of framing their goals. They would get a motivational message, again, no message, or benefit, self-efficacy, opportunity message. A third action variable was time of day. So we wanted to see if there were times of day that would be more impactful to receive a message. These are some of the factors, the contextual variables that we included in the model. And so every morning, the algorithm is retrained on data of all participants. And all this data gets put into kind of thinking about it as a slot machine or a multi-arm bandit, as it's called in the CS world. And so the algorithm generates predictions around what type of message will result in how many steps. And then it chooses a random message from a category. And it's important to point out that the ideal or best category is not always the one that gets sent out, because there are also combinations of messages that may have an impact. All right, so we apply this model to patients at the general hospital from primary care clinics, English or Spanish speakers with diabetes diagnoses and high depression symptoms. Unfortunately, we were getting off the ground during COVID and had to shift gears and include some social media and online recruitment, primarily from Craigslist, to supplement the recruitment that was quite challenging during those initial stages of COVID. We just finished this trial back in December, and this is the final numbers. We had 3 groups where we had an adaptive arm that had the reinforcement learning intervention. We had a random arm that received random messages. And then we had a control group that only got the app and was asked to track their steps over time. And all of these received a weekly kind of mood monitoring message as well. Here's some of the participant demographics. So importantly, there are no significant differences. So randomization worked. You can see that we're relatively diverse. There's about 22 to 20, between 22 and 29% Spanish language speakers. Race and ethnicity is broadly representative. And education levels are also relatively broad. This is likely to the inclusion of primary care participants at the safety net clinics. You can also see a relatively large number of folks who are unemployed or experiencing disability, which I think again reflects the low income or vulnerable state of part of our population at least. In terms of pre-intervention steps, generally speaking, folks had low levels of step counts, so between 3,000 to 3,500 or so. Low activity in this group. And we found that the adaptive arm did indeed increase steps over time compared to the random condition and the control arm. So this is an indication that the reinforcement learner did indeed work. We just ran these analyses, so we're kind of digging in a little deeper and hope to publish these findings soon, but we're excited about this finding. So texting can be helpful, again, particularly if we personalize and make it adaptive using some of this machine learning in the background. Ideally, we can use these types of approaches broadly. And I think what's really important is to have broad representation within our samples, particularly when we're training AI models, machine learning models. They're not always the most representative. So we think it's really important to build this work from the ground up. All right, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, so I'll run through this part a little bit more quickly, but I'll tell you about our Stay Well project, which started at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, mostly as a service to send folks messages. For 60 days to help them cope through some of the challenges of social isolation and the mental health side effects of the COVID pandemic. So we sent them 2 messages a day based on CBT and DBT principles. These are some examples. We also asked them a mood rating question afterwards. Again, we applied reinforcement learning to a 3rd phase of the project. So the first phase, we just sent them out to a lot of people, about 600, and found that there were improvements overall, but we didn't have a control condition because we didn't feel it was quite ethical during that period. But we wanted to apply some of the DIAMANTE reinforcement learning to this project as well. So we had 3 groups in a 3rd phase where the control group received a mood rating message and then sometimes a feedback to that mood rating. The random group received a random message, then a mood rating, then feedback. And then the reinforcement learner received a reinforcement learning based message using the mood rating as a reward variable, and then a feedback to that mood. So overall, we found that there were decreases in PHQ-9 and GAD-7 symptoms. So we did recruitment both via Facebook and also via a clinical trial registry called Health Match. As you can see, the Health Match folks have higher symptoms. So they are above the moderate threshold, and they dropped to almost in the mild range, but not quite. So there were overall effects. However, there were not significant differences across the control, random, and reinforcement learner groups, with the only exception being a difference in the GAD-7 score in the Health Match group between the reinforcement learner and the control group. So that pairwise comparison only. So it didn't quite work, and we didn't get those significant findings that we saw in the DIAMANTE trial. Some of the reasons for this, there are a couple of reasons. One is that here we use an individual level model where the algorithm was trained on individuals' responses to the messages, whereas DIAMANTE, we use a group-based model. So we were taking advantage of everyone's data. And so it may have taken too long for this intervention to learn, since it was only 60 days. And another reason is that it looks like the control condition, which is a mood monitoring condition, may have been too strong of an intervention. And one of the indications we have for that is we looked at feedback from people, and these are these are 3 random people that provided feedback. The one on top was somebody who rated the intervention highly, they loved it. The middle one was somebody that thought it was okay. And the 3rd one is somebody that they didn't love the intervention, they wouldn't recommend it. But all of them, you can notice, found that it helped make them aware of their mood. And I don't know what condition they were in, because they were pulled at random, but this was a consistent piece of feedback that we received, that people are aware of their mood. So that may have been too strong of an intervention. And we do know that being aware of mood is a core element of most of our interventions of CBT. And in some ways, it's almost a mindfulness intervention in some ways as well. There were some other kind of pieces of feedback, mostly around personalization and providing more resources. We also did another phase of the study where we compared Latinx participants with non-Latinx white participants, and found that the Latinx folks had more improvement overall compared to the white participants, based on PHQ-8. And there were more people that improved into from the moderately depressed to the mild category among the Latinx folks. And this is, I think, interesting and related to a point I made earlier about addressing more diverse participants and having more resources available to them that are targeting them. So as I mentioned, Spanish speakers don't have a lot of access to interventions relative to English speakers. And it's a way to, I think, meet more of a need than continually going after kind of the same population. So effects are relatively small, but they are scalable. All right, and hopefully I didn't talk too fast, but wanted to make sure to leave some time for questions. I want to thank funders and everybody that's participated in on these projects. It really has taken a team, in particular, Chris Carr and Audacious Software, who's been a partner through all of these projects. So, thank you all. And now I think we have some time for some questions.
Thank you, Adrian. That was a terrific talk. So if folks have questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A. You can see that at the bottom of your screen. And I'll just go ahead and start. I have a bunch of questions. So one is, it was kind of interesting in the first study that you did looking at text messaging with to support standard CBT therapy. It's clear that it had a strong effect, even though it was just pretty rudimentary, it seems like, in the kinds of messages. And then in the DIAMANTE study, it looked like, if I saw that correctly, the targeted personalized messages, the ones that were delivered by with reinforcement learning, produced a nice effect, but you didn't see much of an effect with the random messages. And obviously you have a fully automated treatment versus something that is adjunctive to care. But I wonder if you can talk about those differences and why you think you might be seeing those.
Yeah, well, I think that, a lot of this goes back to kind of the supportive accountability idea. I think the first one is very much the basis is the face-to-face traditional intervention, and you add on this layer of technology. And so I think the technology is working to help with the engagement piece, because most of the intervention is being delivered in person, right? And so it's maybe a little bit of practice outside, but the core, you can't match that 1.5 hour more intensive intervention compared to whatever you take a minute or two to read and respond to a message. And in the DIAMANTE trial, it's all mobile, so it's tracking your steps and then getting the messages, right? And I think also importantly is that one lasted 6 months, which I didn't mention. So a lot of these interventions, I think if we do them for a month, for 2, we can get some good effects. But over time, sustaining that for 6 months is hard. And my sense, we haven't gone back into the data, but my sense is, particularly with random messages, they might get pretty old after a while, right? Maybe after about 2-3 months, you just kind of, they don't have any effect, right? They're just kind of coming at you randomly. And the adaptive messages may allow for some of that targeted nature. Maybe they're adapting over time as well. And so those are some of the things we're going to look at, particularly which categories maybe were most impactful, most helpful. So I think those are a couple of different factors. And I think it goes back to thinking about, again, not just the technology, but how we're applying the technology. Where does technology fit into the broader kind of ecosystem of care?
Yeah. There's another question, but I just want to have one take my prerogative here with one follow-up. So in the comparison of the reinforcement learning in the DIAMANTE study versus the healthy SMS,
Stay well.
Part of the difference there in the how useful reinforcement learning was is that in Diamante, you're using a behavioral target for reinforcing, that people is actually actionable, and yet and using mood. I mean, that's not really actionable. It's that's not what people need to do. And I'm wondering if that might be part of the difference that you're seeing there.
I do think that that's part of it. I think one of the things we want to do, so I think, behaviors are so much nicer because they are concrete and they're not subject to interpretation. You either did it or you didn't do it, right? And sure, there's error around the sensing and whether we caught all the steps, but some of that washes out over time. With mood, I could say I'm at a 9, but maybe really I'm avoiding something, right? I was telling somebody last week that I had a client that would have zeros on his PHQ-9 every week, but the second he started talking in therapy, would start crying, right? And so the self-report, we all know that self-report is not quite as accurate as what you're doing, as reporting by walking, for example.
Yeah.
So one of the things just a last point there, we're going to try to run some simulations to look at, would a group level model improve the outcomes of, let's say, the Stay Well algorithm, to try to understand that aspect of it a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So a couple questions here from Neo Gebru. So thanks for your talk. Do you have thoughts on how to tailor texts in the future or make things more interactive while maintaining scalability? And then the second one, can you please share your experiences with Healthy SMS? We're preparing to launch a text messaging study and are considering text IT. Any lessons learned and tips using the texting programs software?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to be done with tailoring. I think that I really like the reinforcement learning approach, broadly speaking. It's, in some ways, it's relatively straightforward, but it's learning, it's adapting over time. So I want to keep kind of doing that. I think we have to look at language models, ChatGPT, et cetera, to think about how to integrate those. I think that what we have to do there is be careful with how we're presenting those as options. Some of you may have seen that Coco did a kind of internal study where they had ChatGPT generate responses to participants, and participants rated those more highly than responses by live humans, until they realized that they were generated by a chatbot versus a person, right? And I think that we need to be transparent, but we can also blend things to some extent. So there may be ways, for example, of we're starting a project working with peers in the community who may not have a lot of training, but maybe we could use these language models to generate options, right? So of these 3 options, maybe choose one to send or to adapt. And so we need to figure out ways to blend these things to, as you mentioned, to maintain scalability. In terms of Healthy SMS, I'm biased because it should be in my disclosures. I developed Healthy SMS with Chris Carr, and we've licensed it to folks. So that's really mostly what we focused on, in part because when we developed it, there wasn't much out there. It's worked really well as a scheduling kind of software to meet our needs. And some other folks have adapted it in different ways. And now we're also integrating some of the machine learning modules through our colleague, Joseph Williams in Toronto. So there's some interesting aspects to it, but it's not quite as refined as something like Text It or Text IT. I don't know how it's pronounced.
All right. And a question from Chelsea Brown. So thank you for sharing your findings. In the mood text study, mood day before session predicts attendance. Was there a brief mood intervention that emerged as the most successful way to improve mood prior to a session and therefore improve attendance? Or is that something you'll explore in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we didn't we didn't quite get to that point. What we were hoping to do, and we actually got interrupted by the pandemic again, is to provide kind of an enhanced reminder to people who had lower mood. So if you sent a lower mood to say, maybe the day before, we've noticed you may not be feeling, as great as you have been in the past. Remember that, coming to session may help you get out of that funk or something along those lines, right? So the idea is wording things in different ways, but that's the way we've been thinking about targeting, is to recognize what's going on and to provide that nudge.
All right. Well, there's no other questions coming in, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask other questions that I have. So I'm torn here. There's two directions I could go. So, so one, I guess, is in the implementation direction. So, like the first study that you presented, I mean, it's just it seems so obviously clear that this is a benefit, and could be relatively easily, it seems like something that would be relatively easily implementable. But I think any of us who've tried to implement know that it's like it's extremely difficult. So what are your thoughts about like how how to successfully implement something like that? Because it seems like the benefits are so obvious and clear.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's honestly been probably a little bit frustrating that we haven't been able to do a little bit more. I think we were on the track of doing a little bit more of that implementation, and then COVID kind of messed things up. We're going back to a little bit more of that, regular world of having more of this type of care. But some of the key factors that I think limit implementation are actually based on more clinician level factors. There are a few clinicians that I worked with on this project who were really excited and wanted to roll it out. But there were many who were worried about being responsible for messages coming in at all times of the day. Liability around suicidality. Those are some of the key factors that people worry about, right? And I think this speaks to a little bit of the policy challenges and the balances of, being worried about liability, but then that sometimes leads us to withhold something that could be beneficial to participants. And that's a balance that I think we always need to hold. And it's one of the things that I think has limited this taking off a little bit more quickly. I mean, another is more practical in the sense that we developed it for this type of CBT intervention. So it was kind of scripted out in that sense. So we would have to think about different ways to develop it with interventions that are a bit more, adaptive in a sense, right? And maybe flexible by participant. But I still think that something as simple as mood monitoring, right, throughout the week, in combination with therapy, I think can be really valuable. But you're right, we haven't quite rolled it out. Part of it's also a matter of finding partners and kind of scaling this up a little bit. So if folks are interested, I'd be happy to.
And you only have 24 hours in a day like the rest of us.
Yeah, there's that too.
So Chelsea Brown has one additional request to share a reference or a link with the reference to the ChatGPT study, if you have that.
I'll look for it. It was just a Twitter post, to be honest, but I'll see if I can find.
Okay, and then Karina Klimchuk. I'm interested in using ML with my tech work, but it seems like such a jump to learn Python. How did you get started with ML as a psychologist, or do you work with CS collaborators who do ML implementation?
Yeah. So the answer is the latter. So I've worked with folks who are in computer science, and so I don't do the ML. I've started to learn how to talk about it, learn the terms, but haven't done it myself. One thing I will say is, I also think ChatGPT and things like this are helping because there's some level of coding that they can start to do. And it's not perfect, but that combined with a CS student, for example, can get you somewhere, at least for a smaller scale study.
All right, and then there's another question from Jason Kolditz, which sounds like the same one that Chelsea had, wanting the citation to that. And given that it was a post that you saw there, it sounds like it's the things that people could use to search. It sounds like.
Here, I just found it right now.
Oh, you did? Okay.
It's more of a, this is more of a news article, but either way, it gives the idea. But you can, oops. Yeah.
No, but it sounds, it certainly sounds plausible. And it also sounds like the kind of thing that, our culture around this is probably going to be changing pretty rapidly. So what people are finding today may not reflect how people feel about it, 6 months or a year from now.
And it's also generational. I think that, people growing up in this age of that kind of interaction are probably going to take to it much differently than people who have, grown up in more human interaction, for better and worse, right? I think we also need to kind of keep an eye on to what that means about how we live and relate to other humans, but there's a lot of variability.
Yeah, well, all this world of texting and chat GPT, we're probably all thinking about how we can use it and what the benefits are and what the what the risks are to patients. So we are just about at the top of the hour here. So thank you very, very much, Adrian, for a really stimulating talk.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation.
All right, and folks, so for next month, the first Tuesday, will be Jean Rhodes, who will be talking about scaling mental health services through technology-enhanced mentoring. And Jean's work is really around how to develop programs that can use lay and peer coaches, how to manage them, how to set them up, and she'll be talking about how sort of more on the coaching side. So until then, thank you very much, and we will see you next month. Goodbye.